On the 1 year anniversary of burying my wife, my daughter's voice crackled through the phone speaker. You can't provide the life I deserve. Her husband's voice joined in agreement from the background. I stood there stunned in the middle of my living room filled with strangers, people I didn't recognize who had somehow ended up in my house on this sacred day. I felt something cold settle in my chest, not grief this time, but clarity. For 28 years, I'd given everything: my house, my savings, my sleep, my sanity. I'd watched them take and take while I smiled and provided more. But standing there, humiliated by a speakerphone call in front of people who meant nothing to me, on the day that meant everything, I made a decision that would change everything. Their needs were about to lose my address. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories. The fishing rod felt familiar in my hands as I packed it into the truck bed, the same ritual I'd been following for the past few weeks. The first months after Zoe died had nearly destroyed me. I couldn't get out of bed, couldn't eat, couldn't even look at her photographs without falling apart. But I'd pulled myself together eventually, got back to my routines, started taking care of the house again, even began enjoying small things like my morning coffee. Then, somewhere around month 8, the weight settled back in. Different this time, not the sharp agony of fresh loss, but a gray blanket of exhaustion that made everything feel pointless. That's when Valerie started her campaign. Dad, you really should consider talking to someone, she'd said last month, her voice carrying that careful tone she used when she thought I wasn't handling things well. You've been so withdrawn lately. It's understandable after losing Mom, but Hugh had been more direct, as usual. Look, it's been hard on all of us watching you mope around the house. Maybe some time away would help everyone. The way he said everyone made it clear who he really meant was bothering him. They'd been living in my house for 3 years now, saving for their own place, and apparently my grief was inconveniencing their domestic bliss. I didn't believe in therapists, never had. Men of my generation dealt with things differently. So we'd reached a compromise. I'd take up fishing again, get some air, give them space. Your outlet, Valerie had called it, smiling like she was doing me a favor. So here I was, loading up for another weekend by the lake, the same routine that had kept peace in my house for weeks now. The irony wasn't lost on me, grieving my wife by leaving the home we'd built together so my daughter and son-in-law could have their privacy in my space. I called Valerie before heading out Friday morning. Everything good at home? I asked, hearing the familiar sounds of my kitchen in the background. She was probably making her elaborate weekend breakfasts that left flour dusting every surface. Oh yes, Dad, everything's perfect here. Don't worry about us. Her voice was bright, cheerful. You just focus on relaxing. The house is in great hands. But Saturday night, lying in my tent beside the lake, something gnawed at me. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow marked exactly 1 year since I'd held Zoe's hand in that hospital room and felt her slip away. Memorial Day wasn't just another weekend. It was sacred. It was mine. I packed up before dawn, driving the 2 hours home with Zoe's favorite song playing on repeat. She used to say she wanted to be remembered with white lilies and quiet stories, not fuss or crowds. I'd planned to spend the day alone with her memory, maybe look through our photo albums, definitely visit her favorite spot in the garden. But as I pulled into my driveway, I saw cars I didn't recognize lining the street. My heart started to race as I approached my front door and heard voices, lots of voices, coming from inside my house. I stepped through my own front door and froze. My living room was full of strangers, complete strangers, drinking from my mugs, sitting on my furniture, laughing at volumes that felt obscene in a house that should be hushed with remembrance. A woman I'd never seen before was rearranging Zoe's flowers, the memorial arrangement I'd so carefully planned, to make room for a party platter. "Excuse me," a woman with perfectly styled hair turned to me, holding my wife's favorite coffee mug like it belonged to her. "I think there's been some mistake. We have this place reserved until noon tomorrow." I stared at her, then at the man casually helping himself to food from my refrigerator. "Reserved?" The word felt foreign in my mouth. "Yeah," the golf shirt man chimed in, not even looking up. "Great little rental setup you've got here. Very authentic." He gestured around my living room with my coffee cup in his hand, though we weren't expecting anyone to show up early. My legs felt unsteady. These people thought my home was some kind of vacation rental. They were treating my sanctuary, the place where Sarah and I had spent 32 years building a life together, just like it was an Airbnb property, on her Memorial Day. "I think you need to leave," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. The woman exchanged a look with golf shirt guy. "Look, sir, I don't know what kind of mix-up this is, but we paid for this weekend. We have confirmation emails and everything." My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and dialed Valerie's number. The strangers in my living room continued their conversations, but I could feel their curious glances as I stepped into the hallway. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Dad? What the hell is going on, Valerie?" My voice came out sharper than I'd intended, but I was past caring about tone. "There are strangers in my house. Complete strangers who think they've rented the place. They're drinking from Zoe's coffee mugs and moving her memorial flowers around like party decorations." Silence stretched across the line. Then I heard her whisper away from the phone, "Shit, he found out." "Found out what?" But even as I asked, the pieces were clicking together in my mind like a lock opening. Another pause. Then her voice returned. Different now. Defensive. Prepared. "Dad, look, we can explain." "Explain what exactly?" "Why there are people in my home on your mother's Memorial Day who think they've booked a vacation rental." I heard Hugh's voice in the background, muffled but urgent. Valerie sighed. "Okay, yes. We've been renting out the house when you go on your fishing trips. We figured since you were taking all this time for yourself anyway, we might as well make it productive." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Productive." I repeated the word slowly, tasting its bitterness. "You've been renting out my home, the home I built with your mother, the home you're living in rent-free. Dad, you're being dramatic." "I'm being dramatic?" My voice rose, and I didn't care if the strangers heard me now. "Today is the 1-year anniversary of your mother's death, Valerie. I came home to remember her, to honor her, and instead I find a house full of tourists treating our life like some quaint bed and breakfast experience. Look, we needed the money, okay? Do you have any idea how expensive it is to save for a house these days? We're doing what we have to do. With my house, without asking me, on today of all days." "You weren't supposed to come back early." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, revealing the calculation behind it all. Something cold settled in my stomach. "So this was planned. You knew I'd want to be here today, and you booked people anyway." "Dad, you need to understand. You can't provide the life I deserve." Her voice carried a tone I'd never heard before, distant and dismissive. "This arrangement works for everyone. You get your space to process or whatever, heck, and we get some income to build our future." The words hung in the air like a slap. 28 years of sacrifice, of working double shifts to pay for her college, of giving up vacations so she could have dance lessons and summer camps, of opening my home to her and Hugh so they could save money, and this was how she saw it. I couldn't provide the life she deserved. "I see," I said quietly, my voice steady now. "Well, I think I've provided quite enough over the years. Hawk, your level of life is no longer my concern, especially since you married Hugh." "Dad, you're being ridiculous." "Am I? I've given you everything, Valerie, everything. And you repay me by turning my home into a business venture behind my back on the most sacred day of the year for this family. You're such an idiot, Dad. You don't understand anything about how the real world works." Her voice turned sharp, cruel. "You never have." The line went dead. I stood there in my hallway, holding the silent phone, listening to the strangers in my living room laugh at something on their phones. Through the doorway, I could see the golf shirt man opening another one of my beers. The woman had found Zoe's reading glasses on the mantel and was trying them on, posing for a selfie. Something shifted inside me then. Not the hot rush of anger I'd expected, but something colder, more purposeful. For months, I'd been accommodating everyone else's needs, making myself smaller so they could be more comfortable. But standing there, watching strangers desecrate my wife's memory while my daughter's words echoed in my head, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced since before Zoe died. I wasn't the broken, grieving father they thought they could manipulate anymore. I was something else entirely now, and they had no idea what they'd just awakened. I walked back into my living room, where the strangers had made themselves even more at home. Someone had turned on my television, and the golf shirt man was now sprawled across Zoe's favorite armchair with his feet up on our coffee table. All right, everyone needs to leave, I announced, my voice cutting through their chatter. I'm sorry for the confusion, but this is my home, and today is the anniversary of my wife's death. This is not a rental property. The perfectly styled woman looked up from her phone with an expression of pure irritation. Look, we already told you, we have confirmations. We paid good money for this weekend. I understand that, but there's been a mistake, a very serious mistake. I tried to keep my voice level reasonable. Today is sacred to my family. I need you to pack your things and go. Are you kidding me? The golf shirt man didn't even bother to look away from my TV. We drove 4 hours to get here. We're not going anywhere. This is ridiculous, another woman chimed in from my kitchen. We have rights as paying customers. I felt that cold clarity spreading through my chest again. You have 30 minutes to pack your belongings and leave, or I'm calling the police. That got their attention. Heads turned, conversation stopped. The golf shirt man finally looked at me with something approaching concern. The police? For what? Trespassing. Fraud. Take your pick. We're not trespassing. The styled woman's voice rose to a near shriek. We have documentation. Documentation from someone who had no legal right to rent this property. I pulled out my phone. 30 minutes. I watched them exchange glances, the first cracks appearing in their entitled facade. After a few minutes of heated whispered discussion, they began gathering their belongings with theatrical huffs and muttered complaints about crazy old men and false advertising. We better get our money back, the golf shirt man warned as he hauled his suitcase toward the door. Every penny plus compensation for this harassment. That's between you and whoever took your money, I replied evenly. It wasn't me. As the last of them loaded into their cars, I called 911. I need to report identity fraud and illegal rental activity, I told the dispatcher. Someone has been renting out my property without my knowledge or consent using forged documents. The responding officer was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes who listened patiently as I explained the situation. She took notes as I showed her the memorial setup I'd planned, Zoe's photographs, the evidence that this was clearly a private residence, not a rental property. Do you know who might have been doing this? Officer Brennan asked. Before I could answer, Valerie and Hugh's car screeched into the driveway. They burst through the front door like they owned the place, which I was beginning to realize they thought they did. Dad, what the hell did you do? Valerie's face was flushed with fury. We just got calls from those guests demanding refunds. Officer Brennan looked up from her notepad with sudden interest. Hugh stepped forward, his jaw tight. Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We help manage this property for him. He gets confused sometimes, especially since his wife passed. Is that so? The officer's tone remained professionally neutral, but I caught the slight hardening around her eyes. She'd heard that excuse before. Yes, Valerie jumped in, her voice taking on that sweet, concerned tone she used when she wanted something. We've been helping Dad with the administrative side of things. He wanted to rent out the house when he goes on his fishing trips, but sometimes he forgets the arrangements. I felt a laugh building in my chest. Not humor, but something darker. Officer Brennan, I'd like to see this documentation they claim to have, particularly anything with my signature on it. Hugh and Valerie exchanged a look that lasted just a fraction too long. We handle the digital bookings, Hugh said carefully. Everything's online these days. I see. And my signature on the rental agreements? Another pause. You gave us verbal authorization to forge my signature on legal documents? I kept my voice calm, almost curious. Officer, I never gave anyone permission to rent my home. I've never seen a penny of any rental income, and I certainly never signed anything authorizing this. Officer Becker turned to Valerie and Hugh. I'm going to need to see all documentation related to these rental transactions. Bank records, signed agreements, business licenses, everything. The color drained from Valerie's face. This is insane. Dad, tell her you gave us permission. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. How many times have you done this? Hugh shifted uncomfortably. That's not really. This was the 7th time, Valerie said defiantly, her voice cracking slightly. 7 weekends at $700 each. Money we desperately needed while you've been off feeling sorry for yourself. The numbers hit me like a physical blow. 7 times. 7 weekends where strangers had slept in my bed, used my bathroom, sat in Zoe's chair. Nearly $5,000 earned by desecrating the home Zoe and I had built while they continued to live here rent-free and ask me for money for groceries, gas, their phone bills. 7 times, I repeated slowly. And how much of that did you contribute to household expenses? Silence. Officer Becker was writing rapidly now. Mr. Dwight, and the answer is 0. They pay nothing to live here, and they've been secretly profiting off my property while asking me to cover their daily expenses. I felt something shifting inside me, like tectonic plates finding a new alignment. For months, I'd been the grieving widower, the confused father, the man who needed managing. But standing there, watching my daughter's scheme unravel in front of a police officer, I realized I was none of those things. I was the owner of this house. I was the one with the power. And I was just beginning to understand how to use it. Officer Becker, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling around me, I'd like to pursue this matter fully. Press charges, file a formal complaint, whatever needs to be done. The officer nodded, her pen moving across her notepad. I'll need access to your bank records to verify no rental income was deposited into your accounts. Also, we'll need to see the forged documents they used to set up these transactions. Can you provide me with your ID and proof of ownership for the property? I pulled out my driver's license and the deed to the house from my filing cabinet, the same cabinet Valerie and Hugh had been living next to for 3 years, the same documents they'd probably seen 100 times. Officer Becker photographed everything, took detailed notes about the Memorial Day significance, and gathered contact information for the displaced renters. We'll be in touch within 48 hours, Mr. Dwight. Don't let anyone pressure you into dropping this matter. Identity fraud and illegal rental operations are serious crimes. As the front door closed behind her, the silence in my living room felt thick enough to cut. Valerie and Hugh stood there, their confidence from earlier completely evaporated, replaced by something desperate and ugly. Dad, you're making a huge mistake, Valerie started, her voice taking on that manipulative sweetness again. We were doing this for all of us, for the family. For the family? I turned to face them both, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in my mind. Which family were you helping when you convinced me I needed therapy, when you told me I was too depressed to function normally? Hugh stepped forward, his jaw tight. You were depressed, Dwight. You needed help. No, I said quietly, the realization washing over me like cold water. You needed me out of the house. You needed me to believe I was broken, that I couldn't handle my own life, so you could handle it for me. The words came faster now, each one bringing more clarity. You convinced me that taking fishing trips was healing, that I needed space to process my grief. But really, you just needed me gone so you could turn my home into your personal business. Valerie's face flushed. That's not. You exploited my grief, I continued, my voice growing stronger. You took my weakness, my lost months after Zoe died, and you weaponized it. Instead of helping me heal, instead of being supportive family members, you saw an opportunity. We were supporting you. Hugh's voice rose, his composure finally cracking. We gave you space, we took care of the house. You took care of the house? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You turned it into a profit center. 7 times you let strangers sleep in the bed I shared with my wife for 32 years. You let them use her bathroom, sit in her chair, drink from her coffee mugs, and all while living here rent-free, asking me to pay for your groceries, your gas, your phone bills. The truth was crystallizing with brutal clarity. You convinced me I was the problem, that I was too much of a burden, too depressing to be around. Meanwhile, you were making nearly $5,000 off my property and still had the audacity to ask me for $20 for dinner last week. Valerie's sweetness vanished entirely. Dad, you're blowing this way out of proportion. Am I? I felt something cold and final settling in my chest. Pack your things. Both of you. I want you out of my house. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Hugh's face went white, then red. You can't be serious, he said. Dead serious. You have until tomorrow evening to find somewhere else to live. Dad, Valerie's voice cracked. You can't just throw us out. We have nowhere to go. You have $4,900, I replied evenly. I'm sure that will cover a security deposit somewhere. Hugh stepped closer, his voice dropping to something that might have been a threat. You're going to regret this, old man. You have no idea what you're throwing away. What am I throwing away, Hugh? The privilege of being manipulated in my own home? The joy of financing your lifestyle while you profit off my grief? We're family, Valerie whispered, but the words sounded hollow now. Family doesn't exploit each other's pain for profit, I said. Family doesn't forge documents and lie and manipulate. Family doesn't turn sacred spaces into business opportunities. I looked at both of them, really looked at them, and realized I was seeing them clearly for the first time in months, maybe years. Tomorrow evening, I repeated. Don't make me involve Officer Becker again. The threat in Hugh's eyes intensified. You'll regret this decision, Dwight, more than you know. But as I watched them storm toward the stairs, probably to start planning their next move, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before Zoe died. Complete, crystalline clarity about who I was and what I deserved. And what I deserved wasn't this. 3 days after Officer Becker's visit, my phone rang again. The sound cut through the unusual quiet of my house. Unusual because for the first time in months, I could hear my own thoughts without the constant background noise of Hugh and Valerie's presence weighing on every room. Mr. Dwight, this is Detective Rodriguez from the Fraud Division. I settled into Zoe's chair, the same one those strangers had been lounging in just days before. My fingers traced the worn armrest where she used to rest her hand while reading her mystery novels. What can I do for you, Detective? We've been investigating the case Officer Becker filed, and I need to inform you of something we discovered during our records search. His voice carried a gravity that made my stomach tighten. Are you aware that someone has filed preliminary paperwork for guardianship over you? The words seemed to echo in the sudden stillness of the room. I could hear the old grandfather clock Zoe and I had bought for our 10th anniversary ticking in the hallway, each second stretching like a small eternity. What are you talking about? My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant. Adult Protective Services has a file with your name on it, dating back 3 months. Someone reported you as potentially unable to care for yourself due to severe depression and cognitive decline following your wife's death. I felt the blood drain from my face. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and I gripped the phone tighter. 3 months, I whispered. That would put it right around the time they'd started insisting I needed outlets and space to process. There are documented incidents of concerning behavior and requests for psychological evaluation to determine your competency. Detailed reports about your daily activities, your emotional state, your ability to manage basic household tasks. My mind flashed back to all those moments when Hugh had his phone out, claiming he was texting or checking emails. The way he'd ask me pointed questions about whether I'd eaten that day, whether I'd showered, whether I remembered to pay bills. Questions that had seemed caring at the time, but now felt like an interrogation. Who filed this? But even as I asked, I already knew. Hugh Morrison, your son-in-law. The silence that followed felt thick enough to drown in. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, feel my hands beginning to shake with a rage so pure it scared me. Detective, I need to ask, how far along is this process? The initial petition has been filed, but no evaluation has been ordered yet. However, if someone were to report an incident of you being unable to manage your affairs or behaving erratically, it could move forward quickly. Sometimes these cases can be resolved in a matter of weeks if the documentation is compelling enough. I thought about all those fishing trips they'd encouraged me to take. All those conversations about therapy and getting help. The way Hugh always seemed to be documenting my bad days with his phone. The gentle, concerned way he'd ask Valerie, always within my hearing, whether she thought I was getting worse. I'll be right down to your office, I said, my voice steadying with resolve. 2 hours later, I sat across from Detective Rodriguez in a sterile conference room that smelled of burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the photocopied documents spread across the table between us. Documents that painted a picture of a man I didn't recognize, a broken, incompetent shell who couldn't manage the basic functions of daily life. Mr. Dwight, I have to tell you, this is one of the most systematic documentation efforts I've seen in a case like this, Detective Rodriguez said, sliding another page toward me. Look at this entry from 6 weeks ago. I read Hugh's neat handwriting. Subject spoke to deceased wife's photograph for approximately 10 minutes this morning. When asked who he was talking to, became agitated and defensive, appears to be losing touch with reality. Recommend immediate psychological evaluation. My hands clenched into fists. Those 10 minutes. I remembered them clearly. I'd been telling Zoe about the birds that had returned to her garden, how the roses she'd planted were blooming despite her absence. It had been a moment of connection, of love continuing beyond death. He'd turned it into evidence of mental illness. The scary part, Detective Rodriguez continued, his voice gentler now, is how methodical this is. Look at the pattern. Every report builds on the previous one. He's documenting your grief as psychological deterioration, your independence as incompetence, your privacy as suspicious behavior. I flipped through more pages, each one a knife twist. Reports of me neglecting household maintenance, while they were secretly collecting rental income that should have covered repairs. Claims that I was financially irresponsible and couldn't manage basic bills, while they were draining rental profits and asking me to cover their daily expenses. Statements about my social isolation and withdrawal from normal activities they discouraged me from pursuing. If he'd succeeded in getting guardianship, the detective explained, he would have had legal control over your finances, your property, your medical decisions, everything. You would have become a legal non-person in your own life. Can we stop this? The fraud charges we're building will definitely help your case. But Mr. Dwight, this suggests a much larger pattern of predatory behavior. This level of documentation, this systematic approach, I don't think you're his first target. We need to expand our investigation. When I returned home, the late afternoon sun was slanting through the kitchen windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. I found Valerie and Hugh standing on opposite sides of the kitchen island, their body language screaming tension. Their voices had been raised. I could hear it in the way the silence fell too abruptly when I walked in, the way they both turned toward me with guilty faces. "Dad," Valerie started, but I held up my hand. I took a moment to study them both. Valerie looked tired, stressed, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her eyes red-rimmed. Hugh stood rigid, his shoulders set in that defensive posture I'd learned to recognize over the past few days. "Hugh," I said quietly, setting my keys on the counter with deliberate care. "I just spent the afternoon at the police station learning about your guardianship petition." The transformation in Hugh's face was immediate and startling. The color drained from his cheeks so quickly I thought he might actually faint. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again without any sound emerging. "What?" Valerie turned to stare at her husband, and I could see the exact moment comprehension began to dawn. Her brow furrowed, her head tilted slightly, and something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "What guardianship petition? You didn't tell her?" I kept my eyes locked on Hugh, watching him scramble for words like a fish gasping on dry land. "About the 3 months you've been documenting my incompetence? About the legal paperwork you filed to have me declared unable to manage my own affairs?" "Dad, what is he talking about?" Valerie's voice had gone sharp, dangerous. She moved around the island and is putting physical distance between herself and Hugh. Hugh's mouth opened and closed several more times before any words came out. It wasn't supposed to. I was just preparing in case." "In case what?" The demand cracked through the air like a whip. "In case he got worse. In case he really couldn't take care of himself." The words tumbled out in a desperate rush. I was trying to protect everyone, to make sure we had options if... I felt a strange calm settling over me as I watched their marriage implode in real time. It was like watching a carefully constructed building collapse, inevitable once the foundation cracked, almost beautiful in its thoroughness. "Tell her about the reports you filed, Hugh," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Tell her about how you've been documenting every moment of grief as evidence of mental incompetence. Tell her about the photographs you took of me talking to your mother's picture, and how you described it as losing touch with reality." Valerie's face went white. "You've been spying on my father?" Her voice started low but rose with each word. You've been building a legal case against him? In our own house? Valerie, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. She whirled to face him fully, and I saw something in her expression I hadn't seen since she was a child. Genuine moral outrage, the kind that comes from discovering someone you trusted has betrayed not just you, but everything you thought you knew about them. You've been manipulating both of us. The rental scheme wasn't about saving money for our future, was it? It was about building evidence that Dad couldn't manage his property. You were setting up to steal everything. Hugh's carefully maintained facade cracked completely, and for the first time since I'd known him, I saw his real face. Calculating, cold, and utterly without remorse. He's an old man, he snarled. He was going to waste it all anyway, moping around, living in the past, talking to dead people. Get out! Valerie's voice was deadly quiet. What? Get out of this house. Get out of my sight. Get out of my life. I watched Hugh realize that his carefully constructed manipulation had just collapsed. He looked between Valerie and me, his face cycling through expressions, surprise, anger, calculation, and finally pure malice. Valerie, you're being emotional. You're not thinking clearly. I said, get out! The scream tore from her throat with such force that she had to grip the counter to steady herself. Hugh stared at her for a long moment, and I could see him weighing his options, trying to find some angle, some way to regain control. When he realized there wasn't one, his face settled into a mask of cold hatred. You'll regret this, he said, his voice low and venomous. Both of you. You have no idea what you're throwing away. Without me, you're nothing but a broken man, his pathetic daughter who can't even keep a marriage together. The only thing I regret, Valerie said, tears streaming down her face, but her voice steady as steel, is not seeing what you really are until right now. The only thing I regret is letting you poison my relationship with my father, letting you turn me against the one person who actually loved me. Hugh laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. Love? Is that what you call enabling? Your father is weak, Valerie. He always has been, and you're just like him. As he stormed toward the door, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, but something colder and more permanent. He paused in the doorway and turned back. This isn't over, he said. You think calling off the guardianship stops anything? You think the police can protect you? I know things about both of you. I know your weaknesses, your fears, your secrets, and I will use every single one of them. The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows. In the sudden silence that followed, my daughter and I looked at each other across the wreckage of our family. Valerie's face was streaked with tears, her hands shaking as she gripped the counter. Dad, she whispered, her voice broken. I didn't know. I swear to you, I had no idea about the guardianship thing. I thought we were just trying to make some extra money. I thought the rental idea was mine. For the first time in days, I looked at my daughter and saw not my enemy, but my child, manipulated, used, and betrayed just as thoroughly as I had been. Maybe more so because she'd trusted him with her heart. The real monster had just walked out the door, and now we had to figure out how to clean up the wreckage he'd left behind. The evening after Hugh stormed out, Valerie and I sat across from each other at the kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years. The silence between us felt different now. Not hostile, but heavy with the weight of everything that needed to be said. Dad, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I need you to know how sorry I am, but I also need you to understand how it happened, how he made it all seem so reasonable. I studied my daughter's face in the soft lamplight. The anger I'd carried for days was still there, but underneath it, I could feel something else stirring. The protective instinct that had driven me to work double shifts when she was little, to save for her college fund, to give her everything I thought she needed for a good life. Tell me, I said simply. She took a shaky breath. It started about 6 months after Mom died. I was worried about you, genuinely worried. You were so lost, so distant. Hugh said he'd read about complicated grief, about how it could turn into something dangerous if left untreated. I remembered those conversations, how concerned Hugh had seemed, how he gently suggested resources and support groups. He said the fishing trips were therapeutic, that you needed structured solitude to process your emotions. He held these articles about grief counseling, about how Forced isolation could actually help people work through trauma. Her voice cracked. I thought I was helping you heal. And the rental idea? He said you'd mentioned it yourself, that you'd talked about how the house felt too big, too empty. He said you were embarrassed to ask us directly for help with expenses, so the rental income would be a way to maintain your dignity while still contributing to the household. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized how expertly Hugh had manipulated even her good intentions. He had answers for everything, Dad. When you seemed confused about the arrangements, he said it was normal for people in grief to block out conversations that were too emotionally charged. When you asked about household bills, he said you'd already approved everything, but just didn't remember because you were focused on healing. What about the documentation? The guardianship paperwork. Valerie's face crumpled. I didn't know about any of that until today. But looking back, he was always asking me questions about your daily routines, your eating habits, whether you'd showered or changed clothes. He said he was helping me monitor your well-being, making sure you weren't sliding into clinical depression. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He'd asked me to text him updates when I was at work. How did Dad seem this morning? Did he eat breakfast? Was he talking to Mom's pictures again? I thought I was being a good daughter, keeping track of your mental health. I reached across the table and took her hand. You were being a good daughter. He just twisted that goodness into something else. Can you forgive me, Dad? I know I don't deserve it, but there's nothing to forgive, I said, and meant it. He's a predator, Valerie. This is what predators do. They isolate their victims, turn families against each other, make everyone doubt their own perceptions. You were as much his victim as I was. 3 weeks later, we sat in the courthouse waiting area, Detective Rodriguez reviewing last-minute details with us before Hugh's preliminary hearing. The district attorney is confident about the fraud charges, he explained. The forged rental documents, the identity theft, the illegal income, that's all solid. The attempted guardianship is harder to prosecute directly, but it strengthens the pattern of predatory behavior. Valerie squeezed my hand. Will I have to testify? Your testimony about how he manipulated both of you will be crucial, Detective Rodriguez said. The jury needs to understand this wasn't just financial fraud. It was systematic psychological manipulation designed to strip an elderly person of their autonomy. When Hugh entered the courtroom, flanked by his public defender, I barely recognized him. Gone was the confident, manipulative man who tried to steal my life. In his place sat someone diminished, deflated, facing the consequences of his actions for the first time. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. 7 instances of identity fraud, theft of nearly $5,000, filing false reports with Adult Protective Services, attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Each charge carried its own weight, but together they painted a picture of calculated, sustained predation. When Valerie took the stand, her voice was steady and clear. She detailed Hugh's manipulation, how he'd convinced her that every violation of my privacy and dignity was actually an act of love and care. He made me believe that helping him document my father's behavior was the same as helping my father, she testified. He turned my concern for my dad's well-being into a weapon against my dad's independence. The defense attorney tried to paint Hugh as a concerned family member who'd simply made poor choices under stress. But when Detective Rodriguez presented the guardianship paperwork, months of systematic documentation designed to strip me of my legal rights, the judge's expression hardened. When it came time for my victim impact statement, I stood slowly, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. Your Honor, I began. Hugh Morrison didn't just steal money from me. He stole my relationship with my daughter. He stole my home, my peace, my ability to grieve my wife in dignity. He tried to steal my very identity as a competent adult. I turned to look directly at Hugh, who couldn't meet my eyes. But what he didn't count on was that grief doesn't make a person weak. It makes them understand what's truly worth fighting for. He thought he was manipulating a broken old man. Instead, he woke up someone who remembers exactly how strong he can be when protecting what matters. The judge sentenced Hugh to 18 months in prison, 5 years probation, and full restitution of the stolen funds. As the bailiff led him away, Hugh finally looked at me, his face a mask of impotent rage. I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and smiled. Then I pulled out my phone and took a picture of him in handcuffs. "For my scrapbook," I said cheerfully to Detective Rodriguez. "I want to remember this day." Valerie burst out laughing despite herself, and even the stern-faced bailiff cracked a smile. As we walked out of the courthouse together, Valerie slipped her arm through mine. "So what happens now, Dad?" I thought about it for a moment, breathing in the crisp autumn air, feeling lighter than I had in months. Now? Now we go home. We have dinner, we talk about your mother, and we figure out how to be a family again. Just the two of us? Just the two of us, I confirmed. And that's more than enough. Behind us, through the courthouse windows, I could see Hugh being processed for transport to county jail. The man who tried to make me disappear into legal non-existence was about to discover what real powerlessness felt like. Sometimes justice isn't just served, it's served with a side of perfect, satisfying irony. And sometimes that's exactly what a situation calls for. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. And as always, thank you for watching.